Hi, Romeo. Oh, good. You're already there. Welcome, Romeo. Romeo, can you hear me? Romeo, can you hear me? Oh, good afternoon. Oh, good. I wonder, I was just plugging in my headphones. Yes. Okay, oh, great. Bedankt. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues.
Good
Hi,
afternoon,
Glenn.
Glenn.
How are you?
Good, good. I just want to take a quick roll call, if I may. Can we just see that all our panelists are present? Marlon, could you?
Hello, Glenn, I'm here.
Hi, Marlon. Sorry, I'm also struggling to unmute myself for a second. Julie, you here?
I'm here. Hi, Glenn. Hi, everyone.
We are expecting another panelist as well.
Estebani should be joining us from MISA.
Tapani and Tulo.
Tulo wasn't able to join us. He had other commitments today.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. That's a pity. Julie, just to confirm, we are expecting the MISA representative as well.
Yes, that's right. I'm just sending him an email now.
Colleagues, if it's agreeable, may I suggest that we begin the process of the session, and our representative from MISA will join us as we go. I think for everybody's benefit, there is translation at the bottom of your panel. In Zoom, there is a chat function which we would encourage you to use to raise any questions that you may have or comments to the speakers and the presenters. So I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's session, which is themed, How Can Non-State Actors Effectively Engage with the SADC RISDP Implementation? That's a mouthful, but I think we're all familiar with the terrain with which we are dealing. And this is a perennial concern, challenge, and opportunity for progressive civil society and non-state actors to grapple with. We remain as civil society committed to the most effective, meaningful, and accountable engagement with member states to enable us to give voice to our constituencies and communities' interests and to further the overall objectives of the RISDP, the RISDP, and the SADC Treaty. Colleagues, I'm reminded today of the photograph that was taken at the signing of the SADC Treaty. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but back in the day when we used to have offices, I don't know if you remember those things, long time ago. We used to go to these places of work and we would be with our colleagues and we would have offices, and mostly we would share the space and communicate with each other. But when we still used to have offices, we had a picture of this photograph of the heads of state after they had signed the SADC Treaty. And it's an intriguing artifact of the history of SADC. As much for what's in the picture and for who isn't. You will notice if you look at this photograph that there is actually a representative of a non-state party present at the signing of the SADC Treaty. And that person is the representative of the African National Congress, who was present at the summit that signed the treaty. Walter Sisulu was representing the ANC, which had not yet come into power in South Africa. And it was an indication, a practical representation of SADC's historic and ongoing mission to ensure securing freedom and democracy in the region for all our peoples. The other thing that strikes one when you look at the photograph is who is not in the picture. And the person who is absent in that photograph is the now departed late leader of Zambia, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda. In his stead, Zambia was represented by the newly elected president, Frederick Chiluba, who was a signatory to the SADC Treaty. I mention this to indicate for us the context of our current discussion, namely that the SADC Treaty came into force at a time when our region was undergoing tumultuous change. And the treaty was a consolidation, a promise, a commitment to ensure not only multi-party democracy, but the full participation of the peoples of the region in this very, very wide and far-reaching agenda, which member states committed not only themselves, but the peoples of Southern Africa too. At the heart of this was an idea of egalitarian societies, progressing through sharing resources, through pooling capacities, and through fostering institutions and processes which would embed the best of our peoples in a common community. That vision remains unchanged. In fact, I would say that in translating that vision into the 21st century, we all have this responsibility to sharpen the tools and instruments through which that original vision must be realized. Back in 1992, Africa was undergoing what they called the sort of second wave of democratization, namely the move towards multipartyism and greater inclusion of non-state actors. In the intervening time, we can assess here in this panel how far we have come. Nonetheless, we remain enjoined by the articles of the treaty to secure effective, sustainable, and practical mechanisms for the participation of our peoples in the life of our institutions. We have many views and many experiences, and so I am very, very pleased that we have this highly experienced and insightful panel whose knowledge of SADC and the region whose understanding of the processes of social accountability and the demands of civil society, I think, will enrich our collective understanding. In this process, we would like to be able to contribute to the overall outcomes of our sessions over the last 2 days, day and a half, and consolidate some clear recommendations for the communique, which we will use to engage SADC institutions and processes, but also to consolidate our own operational efficiencies as non-state actors and as progressive civil society. Without taking too much more of your time, I would like to, at this point, hand over to Marlon, who I know many of you are familiar with. Marlon will introduce himself very, very briefly to all of us, to just so that we can all catch up and locate him in our conversation. And he will be sharing with us processes around the SADC National Committees, their strengthening and the opportunities that these may present to us as non-state actors. Is it doctor yet, Marlon?
No comment, Glenn. Thank you so much. It's still Marlon.
Dr. Zakeo then.
Thank you so much, facilitator Glenn Farid. It's a pleasure to reconnect, and good afternoon, colleagues. A special thank you to the PSA Alliance and the co-conveners of this very important dialogue. It's been a great pleasure to be joining you over the last day and a half, almost 2 days now, and just to listen in on conversations being carried on by different colleagues from different organizations across our region. My name is Marlon Zakeo. I work with the GIZ Strengthening National Regional Linkages program based in Botswana. And I am serving as a technical advisor for legal and policy frameworks, and also have country coordination responsibilities for our initiatives in the DRC, Eswatini, and Malawi. And it's my pleasure also to be giving this presentation on behalf of our program manager, Robson Chakwana, who would have wanted to be with you today and give this presentation himself, but he's requested me to give this presentation on his behalf, and I'm happy to be doing so. Glenn, I take it that I can continue onwards for the next 10 minutes.
Oh, yes, Marlon, please proceed. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Just a moment so that I share. I'm not sure if I'm able to share my screen. Okay. So in beginning, I want to share that the story of the background of the program that I'm representing, the Strengthening National Regional Linkages program, seems just as well as the story of the structures that Glenn spoke about for inclusion of citizens in the implementation of the regional integration agenda, especially at the national level. And then strengthening those linkages, a perennial challenge in our SADC region, as mentioned in the opening remarks. Just a quick background on the rationale on why this program was started, is alluding to the recognition that there are various factors that contribute to the gap between SADC regional commitments, as evidenced in the treaty and the over 30 protocols that our member states have signed on to, and the reality of implementation at the national level. Forgive me because my presentation is a bit stuck. So if I can, I'll just continue for the moment. And so the program was established based on the realization that there's a weak alignment between national development plans and regional plans. And in the conversations yesterday, there were some allusions of how member states have started to address this, particularly in the case of Malawi, with Malawi 2063, and the organic approach that Malawi has started to take in aligning its own national development plan to both the RISDP and the Continental AU Agenda 2063. It was also further realized that there is a low level of awareness of the benefits of SADC regional integration among national stakeholders. And this is a part of the reason or the rationale why there had to be a program such as the one that I'm representing today. It was also further realized that the gap in implementation at national level is also due to commitments to multiple regional communities amongst the member states of SADC. And as we know, many of the SADC member states are members of at least one other regional economic community. And so that does divert attention and stretch the limited capacities of our member states in terms of implementation and focus on the SADC regional integration agenda. And at the base, again, that perennial challenge that Glenn so eloquently articulated in the beginning is the issue of limited non-state actor involvement, and not out of a lack of desire to be involved, but out of the absence of a recognized formal mechanism that translates the provisions of the treaty into reality and into a structured process for engagement of non-state actors in implementation of regional integration. It was also further realized that support from international cooperating partners, donors, is not necessarily aligned with the SADC agenda. And furthermore, that there is a weak collaboration between national coordination structures for regional integration or planning entities and also budgeting authorities. And this question of cohesion, again, was posed in one of the panels yesterday, I think from Beatrice from NASFAM, a key question on cohesion between the national structures in our member states. And of course, the key issue for our breakaway session related to the dormancy or complete absence of national coordinating structures in many of our member states. And all of these have contributed to this gap that we face in terms of accelerating the implementation of regional integration goals at the national level. And so the main goal for the SNRL program of GIZ is to work towards accelerating progress towards the implementation of the SADC agenda. And of course, this being done together with key stakeholders in the region. And our main objective is to enhance the capacity of SADC member state structures to facilitate and coordinate the implementation of the regional agenda at the country level. And this is done primarily through three different ways. The first, which is focused on the coordination structures, where the SNRL program works to support member state structures to be established where they do not exist, to be strengthened where they're existing but they are weak, and to be operational according to the SADC Treaty where they're existing but do not fully comply with the provisions of the treaty. So this is a big part of the agenda and the work that our program does across 10 member states in the region. The program also supports capacity building of member states and other key stakeholders to enhance to have more effective management and monitoring of the implementation of the RISDP and other key SADC priorities in the region. So the monitoring element also is quite part of a strong focus of the work that we do. And last but not least, when you have all the coordination structures and they are monitored, the key question of resources is also part of our key areas of concern and activity, where the program supports strengthening of the capacities of member states to mobilize resources so that they can effectively implement the revised RISDP and other key SADC priorities. And in this current phase, we've been working in the areas of agriculture, infrastructure, and industrialization. These are the three thematic areas in which the focus has been. And the operational methodology that is used by the program to ensure this programming is what we refer to as the change project methodology, which is essentially a collaborative tool that we use for planning purposes, for monitoring purposes, but also for building alliances around transformative projects for regional integration. And you find that this is basically based on working across or with the key stakeholders, with government as the main entry point, but also essentially with non-state actors as defined in the treaty, private sector, civil society, non-governmental organizations, workers and employers organizations. The change project methodology also includes collaboration with ICPs and donors and GIZ offices that are based in the different countries across the region where we work. And of course, working with the SADC National Committees and other coordinating structures where they exist, and thematic and sectoral groups and cluster groups in the different countries. And also part of the allies that we work with include public agencies and other state agencies, such as national planning community entities. So to the question of what is the SADC National Committee that has been posed to us, is that we find this in the consolidated text of the SADC Treaty, based on Article 9H, which provides for the establishment of SADC National Committees amongst other SADC institutions. And this is further detailed in Article 16A, and I think this is where you find really the strong legal basis for the establishment or creation of SADC National Committees, where it is a requirement that each SADC member state shall establish a SADC National Committee or SNC, and that each SNC shall consist of key stakeholders. And in addition, that each SNC shall, in its composition, reflect the core areas of integration and coordination referred to in paragraph 2 of Article 12 of this treaty. And we will take a look at the contents of that paragraph. And I think I underlined the word shall, as you can see from the slides, that in 3 of the sentences, the word shall denotes that this is a peremptory provision. It obliges member states and does not give leeway for deviation or reservation. And so I think this is very important in the way that we engage in this conversation, that the creation of SADC National Committees is an obligation that our member states have entered into by signing on to the SADC Treaty. If it wasn't, then the word would be may, which gives leeway to member states. Then in relation to the composition of the SADC National Committees, the SADC Treaty in Article 16A, Section 13, then enjoins each SADC member state to create an SNC that is composed of the following stakeholders, and that is government, private sector, civil society, non-governmental organizations, workers and employers organizations. So the treaty does clearly set out the stakeholders that must be comprised or that must be part of a SADC National Committee as it is established in each member state. And then the Article 16A, subsection 3, also further elaborates that the composition of each SNC should then reflect the activities of the core areas of integration and coordination as per Article 12.2 of the SADC Treaty. And these areas of coordination are trade, industry, finance and investment, infrastructure and services, food, agriculture, natural resources and environment, social and human development and special programs, politics, defense and security, legal affairs and judicial matters, cross-cutting issues, which include poverty, gender information, science, technology, environment, and sustainable development. So in the way that the SADC National Committee is composed, these are areas that the treaty obliges member states to follow in the composition of those SADC National Committees and their structures. In relation to the role of what then is the role of the SADC National Committee, again, the treaty clearly provides that SADC National Committees have a role in terms of providing input at the national level for the design and formulation of SADC policies, strategies, and programs of action. I think this is one of those key elements of responsibility, and that SNCs should further coordinate and oversee at the national level implementation of SADC programs of action and all those commitments that member states make at the regional level. SADC National Committees are also enjoined to initiate projects and issue papers as an input to the preparation of the Regional Strategic Development Plan in accordance to the priority areas that were set out in the SADC Common Agenda. And then lastly, that the SNCs are also obliged to create certain committees, and these include national steering committees, which consist of a chair of the SNC and then chairpersons of the subcommittees. And the main responsibility for these national steering committees is that they should be responsible for ensuring rapid implementation of programs that would otherwise have to wait for a formal meeting of the SNC. So they work in between meetings of the full SNC to ensure that the business continues. Apart from the National Steering Committee, the SADC National Committees are also obliged by the treaty to then form subcommittees and technical committees, which should operate at ministerial and official levels. And in the language of the treaty, these committees are obliged to endeavor to involve key stakeholders in their operations. And I guess maybe this particular provision is subject to interpretation on what it means that member states shall endeavor to involve key stakeholders in their operations. And then in addition that each member state is also obliged to create a national secretariat whose roles include facilitating the operation of the SNC and to produce and submit reports to SADC Secretariat at specified intervals. And then another important aspect that is clearly provided for by the treaty in relation to SNCs is that each member state is also obliged to provide funds for the operation of its national secretariat, which national secretariat is also supposed to be organized or structured according to the core areas of integration, just like the SNC and its subcommittees as well. And in terms of how the SNCs meet, they are also obliged to meet at least 4 times in a year for them to be deemed to be fully operational. I think we may have lost my slide once again. The next one was just a graphic representation of the treaty and how it provides for the structuring of the SADC National Committee and its various other coordinating structures at national level, where you have the SNC with a secretariat and the National Steering Committee of the 6 chairs of the subcommittees and the overall chair of the SADC National Committee. And then you've got your sector subcommittees along the lines referred to in Article 12.2 of the treaty, trade, investment, food and agriculture, infrastructure services, and the other key thematic areas. And lastly, the technical committee. So this is the way that the treaty, the SADC Treaty then provides for how SADC national committees should be structured at the national level. And then within the overall ecosystem of SADC, the SADC, the national committees report into SADC Secretariat and into the Council of Ministers. For the sake of time, I'll just quickly also share a couple of examples on how member states have interpreted and operationalized the provisions of the treaty in their own circumstances. And one key example is the example of Sadaq in Mozambique. I think we did have some participants from Mozambique yesterday and this morning. And one of the most important things that features in the example of Mozambique is that the Sadaq, which is the structure, the regional integration coordinating structure in Mozambique, is based on a clear legal mandate from a presidential decree, which was established on 25 March 2003. And this was then approved by cabinet on that very same day. So there is a law, the Sadaq exists according to a gazetted law in Mozambique, which gives it a strong basis and legitimacy in its work. And then that law provides for a plenary, which is the highest making decision body within the Sadaq, a chairperson, ministerial cluster groups, technical cluster groups, provincial contact points, a secretariat of Sadaq, and then an advisory committee of Sadaq. Sadaq in Mozambique consists of 43 members, 19 which are ministers and 18 which are non-state actor representatives. And these include CEOs of civil society organizations, trade unions, private sector associations, and many others. We've also found that non-state actors have lead roles in across the key technical clusters. And as an example, the Community Development Foundation is the deputy chair of the Social and Human Development Cluster of the Sadaq of Mozambique. There are also various other NSAs that have leadership roles in the sectoral subcommittees of Sadaq in Mozambique. And in accordance or compliance with the treaty, the Secretariat of Sadaq is fully funded from the national budget of Mozambique. In the next slide, you also see how the Kingdom of Eswatini is in the process of formulating an operating model blueprint for the regional integration structures at the national level. And again, the essence is pretty much along the same lines as what has been done in Sadaq and in compliance with the key elements of Article 16A of the treaty, in that there is a clear provision for inclusion of stakeholders as provided for in the treaty and under Article 23 of the treaty, the inclusion of academia, CSOs, employers, employee organizations, the private sector, ICPs, media, and also state parties at the base in the cluster subcommittees that I mentioned earlier on. And these work in the SADC National Committee itself and in its various substructures and technical committees. And the SNC in Eswatini is also meant to exist in a broader ecosystem for implementation of regional integration at the national level. And that includes the SADC National Media Coordinator's Office, which is based in the Ministry of Information, Communication and Technology. And this one addresses part of what I mentioned earlier on about the low levels of awareness of the benefits of regional integration at the national level, and so facilitates the free flow of information between SADC Secretariat and key stakeholders at the national level. And then you've got the hosting ministry, which is the Ministry of Economic Planning and Development, and under whom is the SADC unit, which is the operational unit which provides secretariat services to the SNC and the host ministry. And then you've got the national planning entity and the national contact point, who is the principal secretary in the ministry. And so you've got all these dotted lines just showing the flow of information across the different actors in that ecosystem. So these would be two examples that we have seen in the work that we've been doing with member states, or our member states have sought to internalize and then operationalize the provisions of the treaty in relation to establishment of SADC National Committees and how they would work. I want to end by also sharing in the summary then of how our program provides support to SADC National Committees, the establishment of the structures, and in particular, the inclusion of non-state actors. And this happens in several different ways. The first of which is that the SNRL provides technical and financial support to promote inclusion of NSAs in these national structures to ensure that they comply with the provisions of Article 16A in terms of composition of the structures, in terms of the planning, budgeting processes, and operational methods of those SNCs. The SNRL program also supports and promotes strengthening the capacities of both the state and non-state actors in the development of public engagement strategies and regional integration and public education material on the benefits of regional integration. I think in the morning we did hear from Sadaq in the summary on these important issues, and SNRL has been working with others in the training of journalists so that there is greater awareness on the benefits, actual and potential of regional integration, and to make sure that these stories are publicized and get to be known by the general populace of our region. And then last but not least, the work that our program also does is to work with others to strengthen the capacities of non-state actors to monitor implementation of the SADC regional integration protocols. And of course, ideally, this should be done within the context of the SNC in the countries in which SNCs are properly constituted in accordance with the treaty, and non-state actors are able to have a formal platform for monitoring implementation of the RISDP and the other relevant SADC protocols at national level. And some of the work that we've done is in Malawi with an organization that most may be familiar with, the National Institute for Civic Education, NICE, which has also been doing some work across at least 10 districts in Malawi to provide public education material through various means, popular arts, theater, drama, to ensure that more information is shared with citizens' organizations, but in turn, that we build the capacity of those citizens' organizations to be able to monitor effectively implementation of the commitments that our member states would have undertaken at the regional level. Glenn, I think at this point I can pause, and I hope I've kept within time, and we'll be glad to engage with colleagues in discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marlon. I think that's a very precise and exact overview. Colleagues, I'm going to ask you to bear with us, and if you have questions, please post them in the chat. We will open up for discussion later, but if you have questions of clarification or information or comments at this point, can I ask you to hold back and place them in the chat? Marlon, I was intrigued that you were brave enough to include Eswatini in your presentation. We look forward to seeing how that SNC develops over time.
Thank you, Glenn.
I'm now going to ask colleagues if we can move to the next presentation. Oh, Marlon, just one point. In the work that you're doing, just quick, in 2005, SADC had issued guidelines for SNCs. When you were establishing your methodology and looking at the processes, to what extent did you review or incorporate those pre-existing guidelines for the establishment of SNCs?
Thanks, Glenn. So if I understand you correctly, I mean, my response is that, so we have as a program developed guidelines for the establishment and operationalization of the SNCs, and these are simply based on the provisions of the treaty. At this point, we've developed them and we have shared them with the Sadaq Secretariat. Internally, we do use them in our work with partners as an offer to see how partners can also adopt in their own context to strengthen their Sadaq National Committees. And so we do use them when we conduct health checks to see whether the particular SNC in each of the countries is operating in accordance to the treaty. So those guidelines are exactly that. They are guidelines, and member states, of course, have the liberty to then interpret and then contextualize to their specific need. You see that there will be slight variances across the member states, but the essence, particularly on what the treaty requires in terms of the composition, the mandate, financing, and reporting obligations are pretty much standard.
Okay, thanks a lot, Malu. Colleagues, I'm going to move to our next presenter. Can I just check, is our colleague from MISA present?
He said he was going to join us.
Okay.
He said he was on his way, but I don't see his name here though.
With us. Okay. If then, Julie, could I ask that you make your presentation at this point while we wait for him?
Sure, no problem.
Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here in this session. I am presenting on behalf of the Partnership for Social Accountability Alliance, which is made up of ActionAid, where I sit, as well as the Public Service Accountability Monitor, and SAFAIDS, and the Eastern and Southern Africa Small Scale Farmers Forum, SF. It would have been great if PSAM was able to come and make this presentation, since they are definitely the experts in this area. But our project does use their framework and their concepts. So we've attempted to apply this to Sadiq. So look forward to this discussion and to your comments as well. So this presentation will be on how can the principles of social accountability, so these are the principles as they're understood through the PSAM framework, which I'll present, be applied to the SADC RISDP processes at regional and national levels. So as I mentioned, this is the consortium. So our project looks to improve accountability and gender responsiveness in public resource management, particularly in the areas of HIV, SRH services for adolescents and young people, and agricultural services for smallholder farmers, which contributes to the realization of selected SADC regional commitments across 5 countries. Those are Malawi, Mozambique, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. So as you can see, this project is at the regional level, it's at the national level in the 5 countries, and we also implement in 2 to 4 districts in each of those countries as well. So up until this point, we've just been looking at social accountability in terms of the SADC regional commitments in health and agriculture. But this presentation here will take a look at understanding social accountability through some of the SADC processes as well, and looking at what are the opportunities for non-state actors to engage. So this is the framework through which the project, through which PSAM understands the social accountability system. And that is in terms of how can public resource management be socially accountable. So it looks at the the process of managing resources. So first of all, it looks at process 1, which is looking at planning and resource allocation within government. So the question here would be, what public funds and resources are available to officials and service providers, and how do they plan to use these? So that's looking at what are the planning processes within government, how are priorities prioritized, different issues prioritized, how is budget allocated? And what are the opportunities for non-state actors to engage? So I should point out that each of these processes also is of course processes which are led by government, but there is opportunity for civil society, for non-state actors to engage throughout. So process 2, this is where you look at expenditure management. So the question is, how effectively are public funds spent? So this is looking at financial reports, for example. Can we see how government how it has allocated the funds, but of course, whether those funds are actually transferred and how are they used? Process 3 is looking at performance management. So how do service providers perform in implementing their plans? Are quality public services delivered? So this is where you're looking at the monitoring and evaluation component of government as well. So you're looking at, has government implemented the programs it says it is going to do? Is it implementing it efficiently? Is it implementing it in a way that benefits the most people and the people that it's targeting? Process 4 is looking at public integrity. So this is looking at what are the internal mechanisms within government to prevent misuse of public funds. What corrective action is taken in response to and misuse and abuse of public resources. So if you're looking at national governments, you might be looking at the internal audit function, in some cases the Auditor General, ombudsmans, and so that's what you're looking at there. And then of course there's process 5, which is looking at oversight. And the question here is, are officials, service providers called to account by oversight bodies for their performance? So as we know, the oversight function is usually carried out by a parliament. Or if you're looking at the sub-national level, maybe it's a local council committee, for example. And there's also an oversight component in all the other 4 processes in the cycle. And this is a system, it's a cycle. So if there's a weakness in one stage, for example, if you have a weak planning process, for example, if the consultations are not as robust as they should be, then there's a chance that when you're actually rolling out your programs, in process 3, they might not reach everyone that they're intended to reach. So you need to have strong systems in each of the processes. And how we understand social accountability is seen as a right, that the people have the right to demand justification and explanation as to how public funds are being used, and to demand corrective action if there's misuse of those public funds. And likewise, government has a responsibility to provide justification and explanation as to how government funds are used, public funds are used, as well as to provide that corrective action in a timely and effective manner. So this is the framework. So when we look at the SADC structure, we can also see how we can apply this framework to SADC. As I mentioned, the framework is developed around from the country perspective, but because SADC does manage public funds, it uses public funds, so we can apply the same framework also to SADC. I think it was it was great to hear Marlon's presentation and to see how the SADC National Committees are being strengthened and established in many countries. But I think that we know that they are only in place in just a few countries. And so I think the question is also, if those SADC National Committees are not in place, where can civil society engage? What are in what processes and in which ways can civil society engage and non-state actors and the public more generally in order to influence SADC's processes, social accountability in each of the 5 processes that we just reflected on. Now, the PSAM framework is quite focused on the availability of public documents as well. And so it encourages the use of and the review of public documents that are produced by government that can be accessed by non-state actors to review the planning and the performance of government. So if we look at this, if we look at SADC through this framework, we can look at what documents are produced by SADC. And in order to draw out this information, we referred to the SADC Treaty, we referred to the SADC financial regulations, we also referred to the SADC policy for strategy development, planning and monitoring and evaluation, as well as the communications and promotions strategy as well. So all this information has been drawn from there. But of course, if there's new information or if there's need to clarify, we would also welcome comments as well. So some of the documents that are produced by SADC from the process 1 point of view, so this is the process where you're looking at consultation and development of strategic plans and budgeting, so resource allocation. So some of those documents are the 5-year strategy, which is of course the RISDP, which we're looking at in this meeting, the implementation plan over 5 years, which of course is done at the regional level and as well as localized within each member state as well. And those are publicly available documents. There's annual directorate and unit operational plans, which are produced within the SADC Secretariat. And annual expenditure, so those are not publicly available. And there's also annual expenditure estimates and indicative member state contributions, which are shared with member states and approved by member states. So those are not public documents. Then there's the Consolidated Annual Operational Plan, including the budget, which is approved by SADC Council, including contributions by member states. So this is a public document, and it's shared on an annual basis and approved by council, by the SADC Council. But it is not on the website. And this is approved by SADC Council in March. And it should be on the website, but at the moment, I couldn't locate it. So in terms of process 1, so if we look at how can non-state actors and the public be involved? So NSAs and the public can participate in SADC, or I guess this would be particularly in NSAs, can participate in SADC technical or sectoral advisory committees at the regional level, which help to influence RISDP and policy directions, also affect annual strategic plans, participate in SADC National Committees, as we heard from Marlon, engage with national ministries through permanent secretaries or ministers to influence RISDP and policy directions, provide comment on RISDP and annual budget plans, participate in national budget hearings, provide comment on annual national budgetary allocations to SADC, provide public comment on final RISDP and annual plans. once published, provide comment in the media and to national ministries regarding content. So if we look at process 2, this is around expenditure management. So this is around the financial reporting by SADC. So SADC Secretariat produces monthly and quarterly financial reports internally, but these are not publicly available documents. SADC produces an annual financial report, which is part of an overall annual report, and this is approved by Council in their session by the SADC Council in their session on July and August, and this is available on their website. And that includes, of course, I should mention that the SADC reports do not provide an itemized breakdown of the member state spend, although they will provide the overall amount of the contributions or the planned contributions. And they also indicate this, the council record will also indicate whether member states are up to date with their contributions to SADC, for example. Okay, and if we look at process 2, of course, where can non-state actors be involved here? Again, there's opportunities to engage with national ministries through permanent secretaries or ministers, provide comment on the financial report. So on the final financial report, which is published by SADC, annual financial report. Of course, there's participation in SADC National Committees, review, provide comment on annual financial report, as well as annual country progress reports as well, which is also a responsibility of the SADC National Committees. National budget hearings. So this would be your normal national budget hearings in each of the countries, in each of the member states. So NSAs could provide comment on the previous year's spend on SADC, for example, as per national and SADC financial reports. They could also question why remittances haven't met the commitment, for example. There's also opportunity to provide public comment on the annual financial report. There's opportunity to provide comment in the media, of course. And NSAs could also advocate to make public SADC in-year reporting, which is not currently public. If we look at process 3, around performance management. So again, this is where you look at the monitoring and evaluation of programming. So some of the documents which are produced by SADC as well as member states are at the SADC level. Quarterly reports and 6 monthly reports are produced, which are not publicly available. Member states produce quarterly and annual national reports on protocols and the RISDP implementation against the targets. And these are submitted by the National Planning Commission to the SADC Secretariat. And supposed to be submitted via the SADC online M&E system. And it wasn't clear whether these are publicly available. At the SADC level, there's annual reports, which is annual reports on the annual operational plan, including the financials, which is approved by Council. And this is approved in the July-August sitting of Council. And this should be on the website. This is not on the website. It is on the website, but I think the most recent ones are only available in French and Portuguese. Annual Consolidated Strategy Update Brief. So these are also provided to Council and approved by Council in July and August. And SADC also provides a regular review of the RISDP implementation plan, or sorry, this is would be a 5-year review of the RISDP implementation. And this is an external review, which is approved by council. And this is would be a public document, as I think we noticed during the last cycle. In terms of how non-state actors can be involved. So non-state actors can engage with the SADC National Committees in the member states who are responsible, along with the national contact points, to coordinate monitoring and evaluation for regional plans and policy, and as well as provide input into annual national reports. NSAs can also engage with NCPs and national ministries through the permanent secretaries or ministers. They can provide comment into the annual report, provide comment on the published SADC annual report, as well as make suggestions for issues to be addressed in the following year, such as providing a shadow review of issues in the RISDP, for example. And there could also be advocacy to publish national annual reports. As I mentioned, it's not clear whether these are public documents. Public integrity. I don't know if I'm going over time. Sorry, Glenn. I'll try to tie up pretty quickly. So process 4 is looking at public integrity. So again, this is looking at audit functions within SADC. So SADC has an internal audit function, which produces an internal audit report. There's also, this is also shared with council. There's also feedback on disciplinary hearings and investigations, which is reported to council. And council also provides an oversight report on the annual report, on the annual SADC report. So these are not public documents, but they are summarized in the council record. And there is reference to the number of issues raised in the annual report as well. And how can NSAs and the public be involved in this? So NSAs can provide public comment, for example. They can look at the summarized info that is provided in the record of council meetings, which are public, annual financial reports, which are public. They can also provide comment, yes, as I said, on the summarized findings. And there could be advocacy for the publication of full reports, for the full audit report. NSAs could advocate for the publication of full reports on disciplinary procedures, for example, of the most senior officials or conflicts of interest, council oversight reports, as well as internal, external audit reports. Some of
Julie, can
yes?
I give you 3 more minutes? 3
more minutes, sure. Okay. So this is just now looking at the process 5, which is looking at oversight. So there is a Board of Auditors report, which reviews the annual financial report and the annual report of SADC. This is not publicly available, but it is summarized in the council record and summarized in the annual report as well. So for example, it's in French, apologies, but this is about audit recommendations, the status of implementation of the audit recommendations as of May 31st, 2020. So it mentions a number of issues which are still outstanding from the previous audit report. And this is from the annual report for 2020. And how can NSAs and the public be involved? They can engage in advocacy to support the transformation of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, for example, to expand the oversight function more fully. At the moment, SADC Council is seen as the oversight body. However, SADC Council is responsible for appointing the executive secretary, and the deputy executive secretaries are also responsible for investigating and initiating disciplinary actions, and they're also responsible for approving audits as well. So they're not necessarily an external or sort of parliamentary oversight body in that sense. There's also opportunities to engage with national parliaments, for example, in the absence of a regional parliament, to provide oversight on programs, budgets related to regional programs at national level, and the national contribution, for example, to the SADC budget. So in summary, this is the last slide. How can we strengthen social accountability in SADC, particularly social accountability around public resource management? We can expand NSA engagement with national ministries on SADC programs. We can encourage the establishment of the SADC National Committees with meaningful NSA engagement at national level. We can urge SADC to timeously publish annual documents, plans, and budget reports as per the policy, and expand public access to include other key PRM documents. SADC, in terms of communication, can also be encouraged to hold public briefings around the content of annual plans and reports, encourage public or NSA understanding of SADC affairs. I think that it's also key for the communication strategy of SADC to acknowledge accountability as a key reason for the communications. And then lastly, to support the transformation of SADC Parliamentary Forum into a full SADC Parliament and to provide the full range of oversight functions in SADC. So that's the presentation. I know that was a very full presentation, and I'd welcome comments and questions and corrections.
Thank you, Julie. That was an excellent presentation. And I just want to reassure all the participants that we will share the presentations with you as part of the final report. So you would be able to, and I think some of them have links to other resources as well, which you could then follow up on. Julie, in your recommendations, you make no mention of the use of the proposed non-state actor mechanism as a possible vehicle to improve social accountability practices within the SADC.
Thank you, Glenn. I actually don't know enough about the SADC NSA engagement mechanism to really provide comment on that. But of course, if that would allow for the sharing and communication of more information, an opportunity for NSAs to engage more in the SADC processes, I think that it would be, of course, very useful for social accountability. But perhaps other colleagues here or colleagues on the call could also provide some information around that.
Well, I think it's fortunate that we have Dennis with us from the Secretariat, and maybe he could offer some comment on that when we open up. So Dennis, if you could just prepare your thoughts to that matter when we open up for conversation. I'll come to you first. But right now, colleagues, thank you again, Julie, for the excellent presentation. I'd like to invite Thabani Moyo from MISA region, Southern Africa region, to make the presentation. Thabani, if you could unmute. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Glenn. I highly appreciate it, and thanks to colleagues for the opportunity. I hope my slides will share. I once tried it and it was a nightmare. If it refuses, I'll speak to it, and then we'll take it from there. Let me just see if it is accepting today. So that's all. Okay, let me, here we go. It's refusing to pick documents from my desktop. I'll share the slide the slides soon after with colleagues.
Thabani, feel free to also send it to my email. I can share.
Oh, okay. Let me do it right away. It's much better, actually. Here we go. I think it's with you. Please confirm once you receive. It must be in your email now, but I didn't put subject. But as you get it, I'll probably start the presentation. Thank you very much. How can SADC improve transparency at regional and national levels in terms of a perspective from media development? I think as a form of a background, I think the continent at large has gone through a lot of changes in terms
Tabani, sorry to interrupt you. Before you proceed with your presentation, could you just introduce yourself and remind everyone about MISA?
Okay, thank you. So my name is Tabani Moyo. I am the Acting Regional Director for Media Institute of Southern Africa Regional Secretariat. We have a presence in 8 countries in Southern Africa, where we defend freedom of expression, access to information, and media freedom. And in this case, we also perform a lot of advocacy around the same, and equally defending the various platforms within which information is shared. In addition, we are a coalition that deals with a multiplicity of issues in as far as defending the same right. So this is broadly what we do as the Media Institute of Southern Africa. Taking a deep dive, the background is that Southern Africa and Africa at large have gone through different stages in terms of development of various frameworks that are critical towards safeguarding the rights to expression, access to information, and media freedom, which are all enablers in the enjoyment or in the management of a better and responsive society in as far as transparency and accountability are concerned. That is to say, the declaration of the independent and pluralistic press, which was adopted in Windhoek 30 years ago, and that later on there was a sister framework, the African Charter on Broadcasting, which was adopted from that same declaration. And 30 years on this year, we reviewed the Windhoek Declaration to come up with what we termed the Windhoek plus 30, which is now absorbing different mechanisms in terms of the changing environment. In furtherance of the same, I think Sadaq has been one of the unfortunate procedures that have not been responsive in terms of changing with the changing environment, namely that the Sadaq protocol on culture, information, and sports, read together the Declaration on Information Communication Technologies, have remained largely static in their ability to attend to various issues that are affecting the region, while other jurisdictions, that is at AU and at UN, they've been responsive in terms of periodically reviewing their mechanisms that allows for accountability and access to information. The other issue is that the main challenge of these protocols that I have referred to is that they do not absorb the changing nature of technology in terms of how it is governing expression, access to information, and right to privacy, and by extension, the accountability and transparency, which are now increasingly interlinked. So in essence, if you take, for example, the United Nations sponsored through UNESCO, the Declaration on Independent Press, which was founded 30 years ago, and then over the years, due to the changes in technology, only this year in Namibia, we reviewed the declaration and came up with a plus 30, which absorbs these changes within the region. So in a nutshell, there is need for SADC to integrate within itself the mechanisms that allows it to respond to the ever-changing environment, so that accountability becomes a key ingredient emerging from these laws that are, or frameworks that are established at regional level, but now being promoted at national level through the assistance of NSAs. which will enable checks and balances at the same time. In terms of the key proposals for SADC towards an accountable and transparent, probably regional body, the first one is to review the protocol, as I alluded to, protocol on culture, information, sports, to reflect the contemporary media development issues and by extension in furtherance of accountability. This protocol was adopted in 1992, and to this day it has not been reviewed. So in a holistic sense, it remains static and not meaningfully contributing towards influencing accountability debates at national level, and also taking into cognizance that it does not empower non-state actors to hold SADC accountable. The second one is to review the Declaration on Information Communication Technologies, which again is a challenge because of the growth of telecommunications in the region, but globally it is still far beyond the bar in terms of absorbing these ever-changing environments. The third one is that there's need for a regional coagulation of emerging issues, so that by so doing, the issue of media as a platform or as a vehicle for accountability is not exclusively left to the media, but to the multiplicity of state and non-state actors jointly forging together to ensure that at SADC level, there is space to debate on how best to enhance regulation of the media and use by the multiplicity of stakeholders. While the fourth one is the need to rethink the role of media in accountability and regional development. The most unfortunate issue is that the Vision 2050 agenda for SADC does not include media development as a strategic pillar or as a strategy in itself, which means that in furtherance of this vision, it is devoid of the fact that media enables for a checks and balance regime, and media development allows for easy reach and simplification of the agenda when it is part of the strategic vehicle for the regional bloc, and by extension filters through to the national processes, and non-state actors become equally empowered to utilize the same. The fifth one is that SADC countries should be willing to push towards the enactment of freedom of information laws. I think as of now, we have close to 23 laws at continental level, countries which have adopted access to information laws. In Southern Africa, I think it's the least, with only two, probably South Africa and Zimbabwe. The rest, it is still stored in debates and in parliamentary processes. This is despite the fact that these are part of the SDGs, specifically 16.10.1 and 0.10.2, which are mainly to promote for access to information as a vital component of the attainment of other SDGs, or the SDGs that are emerging through the United Nations. In addition, SADC, in reviewing the laws which we proposed initially, should also be equally cognizant of the fact that there's no model whistleblowing framework that allows for those that expose ill doings and other shortfalls are protected from reprisals, and there's need for SADC to come up with a bar, especially influence or adopting the best practices at UN or at AU levels, which can influence the region and then by extension the member states, and provide for the tools for non-state actors to hold the bloc to account. And above all, establishment of working group for the safety and security of journalists. At the AU level, they've got a working group in collaboration with the UNESCO, and at UN level, they've got same mechanism. What SADC needs is to also be responsive to the challenges of attacks of journalists in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Eswatini, among others, who are in dire distress, as a vehicle of ensuring checks and balances and holding those in public spaces accountable. The eighth issue is the need to utilize a multiplicity of channels to communicate, and borrowing from the strat plan of SADC, it points to this as an issue, but there is no strategic direction in terms of how it is going to anchor its communication so that it's responsive to both the current challenges, but also to the youth dividend, and to ensure that there is buy-in across the geographical and demographical divide of the region, which then helps to better influence SADC processes through this multiplicity of platforms. The second from last issue is that of regulations around the use of internet, specifically cyber regulations, which are sprouting in SADC from Zimbabwe, Zambia, Tanzania, Malawi, among others. There is need to safeguard the sources of journalists and vulnerable groups from being exposed through these snooping laws, which then compromise the right to privacy, which is a key ingredient towards holding those in power to account. And this, by its nature, will push back those who are doing good through whistleblowing. The last issue is around internet shutdowns. We are in the middle of a crisis with Eswatini, what's happening, and the partial internet shutdowns there. In SADC already, we have got close to 4 countries that have shut down the internet in the past 2 years. And this is not a good ingredient. It's bad for business, it's bad for human rights, and the African Union revised declaration on freedom of expression and access to information recognizes internet as a human right, which enables for the checks and balances, transparency, and fair distribution of resources. Hence, the need to ensure that it is available at all times through both the regional spaces, but also through national processes of ensuring the internet is always on, and above all, to strengthen the contribution of non-state actors, because SADC would have come up with a guide which they can use to better enhance the regional bloc's response. In a nutshell, thank you for the opportunity. These are our submissions.
Thank you, Tabani, for a very comprehensive overview from the point of view of media and transparency within SADC in relation to the RISDP. Colleagues, we are running very, very short of time. I am going to encourage you to use the chat function to share any comments, questions, or critical reflections you may have. But right now, without further ado, I would like to invite Dennis to please give us a brief 2-minute update overview on the non-state actor mechanism. I think the crisp question here, Dennis, is to what extent the process is ongoing and where we are right now, and what the timeframes would be for the process for conclusion. Dennis?
Thank you, Glenn, and good afternoon, colleagues. I don't know if I have a response to all the questions you have put on the table, but I'll say what I know. First of all, there is a proposal on the table in terms of establishing this non-state actors engagement mechanism. It has been discussed by various organs within SADC Secretariat, and I think it's at the level, at some point it was sent to the Ministerial Council of the organ, the MCO, and I don't have any, at the moment I'm not quite sure if the issues of peace and security, which were supposed to be included, have now been included in that proposal. But I want to say a little bit about the proposal itself, which is on the table. The proposal itself talks about establishing what we call a non-state actors forum. The forum, which will be an important mechanism for input into the SADC decision-making process. That's the idea. And the proposal speaks to the forum being divided into thematic clusters or groups or pillars of development within SADC. So members of this forum will be selected on the basis of their experience and expertise in priority or thematic issues within the region. And the proposal is that they should be, as much as possible, members of existing non-state actors network. So that's the proposal, establishing a non-state actor forum, more or less like what we have as the Sadaq Parliamentary Forum. So it will be established, if everything goes as plans, then legally it will be established through an amendment of the treaty, because now it will be one of the institutions of SADC. So you have to amend Article 9.1 of the treaty, which talks to the structure, to the institutions, which makes reference to the institutions of SADC, and then spell out the structure, the authority and powers of this forum. The proposal, my understanding is that it's supposed to be a consultative and deliberative body. So the oversight role is more consultative, deliberative, and providing recommendations. It's not really a body which will have any, like, some kind of binding authority over what has been decided. That's the proposal, and it should not infringe upon the current powers and authority of other SADC institutions. So it will be more or less consultative, just as it is within the case of the SADC Parliamentary Forum. So Glenn, that's I haven't been really involved in this process, but that's the little I know about what is on the table, and I know that it is being discussed at the very high level of the SADC structures. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm sorry for putting you on the spot. Colleagues, we just received that update on the non-state actor mechanism. So to return to our own conversation here, colleagues, I'm going to ask, if you wish to make a comment, please raise your hand. Yes, Dennis, go ahead.
Thank you, Glenn. I want to come back and make a more general comment following the discussions which I attended yesterday morning and today. Somehow you get a feel that people think there is something called SADC out there as an entity, which is supposed to be implementing the RISDP. And this is not entirely correct. There is no something out there called SADC, which is now going to address issues of youth, issues of climate change, issues of education, health, and what have you. Because SADC is really the coming together of member states to pursue a common agenda. So I think we need to understand that it's member states and actors at the member state level, both state and non-state actors, who should actually be pursuing this integration and cooperation agenda. At the regional level, we have the Secretariat as a coordinating body, and it provides some kind of it has a role in terms of capacity building, in terms of developing these instruments, in terms of developing strategies and plans. But these strategies, and of course at the national level, we have those coordinating structures which Marlon was talking about, and these also have that coordination function. But everything, this agenda, this integration and cooperation agenda, has to be sort of mainstreamed or incorporated into the national plans for this whole thing to work. And therefore, non-state actors should also be part of the planning and budgeting process at member state level. Apart from being in these members of these coordination structures, which Marlon was talking about, but they should ideally be part and parcel of the budgeting and planning process at member state level, so that they make and they should also make sure that this regional integration and cooperation agenda is embedded into those plans and strategies and what have you, and the budgets. I thought that's also important to know. to understand. So even this non-state actor forum, which I was talking about, it will probably provide some kind of oversight on the plans and budgets and expenditures of the Secretariat. But that doesn't tell the whole story, because the Secretariat is just a coordination entity at the regional level. A lot is happening in member states themselves. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Dennis. Quickly, colleagues, in 30 seconds, I'm going to allow Mandla from EJN and Marlon. I'm going to give you each 30 seconds, please, colleagues.
Actually, it's Simon from Economic Justice Network.
Sorry, Simon.
Thanks, Comrade. I would just like to ask Comrade Marlon to share information on his experiences of working with the SADC National Committee in South Africa, and also to share the contacts of the officials that are involved in this in the South African context.
Thank you, Comrade Simon. Marlon, I'm going to hand over to you for 45 seconds.
Thank you so much, Glenn, and thank you, Simon, for the question. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to be very helpful, Simon. Our program is working in 10 member states, and South Africa is not one of those. So unfortunately, I don't have any experience working with the SNC or the Sadaq National Contact Point for South Africa. I think the last contact I had was in my previous work with the Southern Africa Trust and working with the DERCO, with the Department for International Relations. And so I think those were the contacts that I could perhaps urge you to check through DERCO and possibly with the Sadaq Council of NGOs. But we could look at this bilaterally outside of the meeting. And then Glenn, I had raised my hand just also to a little bit to appreciate the presentations from Tabani and from Julie. And I think that some of the opportunities Julie shared as well on opportunities for NSA engagement with the SADC National Committees. There was a question that perhaps cannot be answered in this meeting because of time pressures, but perhaps good to follow up on issues of access to quarterly and annual progress reports that Julie mentioned are not publicly available, and whether to see whether those could be availed to assist at least with the process for monitoring implementation where non-state actors are concerned. And then the last part I wanted to bring out as well was that there are also opportunities for non-state actors, not only for taking up space, but also from tapping into the diverse reserves of skills and knowledge across the many different organizations, where there's trainings for members of SADC national committees, even supporting secretariats of SADC national committees. I think, again, Malawi did mention yesterday that they are opening the door for further engagement with non-state actors in their context. There is a new SNC that has been re-established in Malawi on the 1st of April this year. And so there's an openness to getting more people involved, more stakeholders. And you find that because of the high turnover from our experience in member states structures, NSAs could play a key role actually as a resource, as a knowledge resource, but also to help sustainability of these national regional integration coordinating structures. And again, from the important discussions yesterday, Zambia spoke to what can sometimes happen if this momentum is not sustained. That Zambia, when she was chairing SADC, did establish an SNC, but after 2 years, the SNC collapsed. And I think that if NSAs are involved across the technical committees, the sectoral committees, their presence there and consistency in providing additional knowledge and data from communities can help as a tool for sustainability. Thanks, Glenn, for your generosity with the time.
Thank you, Marlon. I think those are excellent points. colleagues, I want us to close now, and unfortunately we haven't had time. I'm made to believe that Zoom meetings are much more efficient and that we can always keep to time, but with heavy topics like this, which require detailed information and presentation, it's not always possible. I want to thank all our presenters for the excellent information and reassure all of you that the presentations will be shared and the resources will be made available to you. I think from the large number of participants, we can really affirm that the treaty's provisions for the participation, the full participation of non-state actors is something that we remain committed to as civil society and as non-state actors. And I think from all the comments, we will wish to take the opportunities available to assist the Secretariat and Member States to strengthen SNCs at national level, but also to operationalize the mechanisms that are proposed for non-state actor participation in the RISDP. I think, colleagues, we are also required from particularly Dennis's key inputs to remain alive to our responsibility as non-state actors to be an agent for accountability and a partner in the implementation and monitoring of the RISDP processes going forward. Sadiq is not a building in Botswana. It's not the Secretariat. It is in fact a multiplicity of institutions and processes in which all citizens and people can and must participate. And I think we look forward to strengthening that process going forward from these meetings, from the meeting that we are having today. And I think it will be taken up in the communique as well. Colleagues, with unfortunately having run out of time, I do hope that the presentations, the contributions and discussions have enriched your understanding. And I think right now we have to log off our session and rejoin the plenary. Is that correct, Julie?
Yes, that's right. So the plenary starts at 4 o'clock. So there's a 20-minute break, 15-minute break. Hello?
Julie, if there's a 15-minute break, I'm sure some of you want to avail yourselves of that. Is there any chance of us, could I open up for anyone else who has any burning issues before we close?
Sorry, Glenn, we're actually, the team that's drafting the communique is using the same Zoom account.
Okay.
So we're being kicked out of our room.
This is the proverbial, I didn't think it could happen on Zoom, but there you have it.
It's happening.
The door has been opened and we have to leave.
People are standing at the door staring at us.
Okay, we don't want to disrupt our process, which has gone very well so far. Colleagues, thank you very much, each and every one of you, for your time and your insights. We look forward to seeing you again at 4. Enjoy the break, and those of you who are working through the break, everything of the best. Thank you again to all the participants and our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.